You think intelligent people are disappearing. They are not. They are withdrawing, quietly, strategically. And if you are watching this, there is a real possibility you are already in that process without admitting it. The world did not get dumber overnight, it got louder. Noise replaced depth. Performance replaced thought. Speed replaced precision. And men who once believed their intelligence would give them leverage are now realizing something unsettling. It gives them distance. You scroll and you see confidence without substance, visibility without competence, certainty without understanding, and part of you feels contempt, but another part feels tired. Not because you lack ability, because you see too much. You notice patterns others miss. You detect manipulation in conversations. You sense when opinions are borrowed instead of formed. And slowly, without drama, you begin to disengage, not in rebellion, in exhaustion. There is a psychological cost to awareness. Most people survive through selective blindness. They simplify the world to protect their energy. You don't. You analyze tone, motive, structure. You dissect conversations after they end. You replay mistakes in high definition. You predict outcomes before others even notice risk. And here is the part no one says directly. The more intelligent you are, the less the world feels built for you. Social spaces reward volume, not nuance. Algorithms reward outrage, not depth. Workplaces reward politics, not clarity. So what happens? The intelligent man adapts, not by fighting louder, by stepping back. He speaks less, shares less, exposes less. He becomes harder to read, harder to access, harder to find. From the outside, it looks like disappearance. From the inside, it feels like preservation. But preservation has a shadow, isolation. You start telling yourself you prefer being alone, and sometimes that is true. Solitude feels cleaner, more controlled. But there is a thin line between chosen solitude and strategic retreat caused by disappointment. And most men never examine which side they are on. They just slowly fade into routines. Work, gym, screen, repeat. Conversations become transactional. Friendships become shallow. You convince yourself you are fine because you are functioning, but functioning is not the same as advancing. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this tension long before social media, long before modern performance culture. He observed that the more a man has within himself, the less he requires from the outside world. That sounds powerful, and it is, but it is also dangerous, because self-sufficiency can quietly turn into detachment, and detachment can turn into invisibility, not because you lack value, but because you stop engaging the arena entirely. Here is the uncomfortable question. Are intelligent men disappearing because society rejects them, or because they have decided the effort is not worth it? That distinction matters. One makes you a victim of the environment. The other reveals a strategic withdrawal, and strategy can be reversed. Victimhood cannot. If this kind of conversation feels rare where you are, subscribe, not for motivation, for clarity, because most spaces will not confront you like this. The real issue is not whether intelligent people are vanishing. It is whether they are slowly convincing themselves that invisibility is strength. And that belief, if left unchecked, changes everything. Let's diagnose this correctly. What you call disappearing is rarely physical isolation. It is psychological contraction. The intelligent man does not vanish from the world. He reduces his exposure to it. He speaks less in meetings. He shares fewer ideas publicly. He stops arguing online. He withholds opinions in rooms where he once challenged mediocrity. This is not weakness, it is ego defense. When repeated friction meets high awareness, the mind protects itself by conserving energy. You begin to calculate the return on expression. If the return is low, you withdraw the investment. Over time, this calculation becomes automatic. You scan a room and instantly assess intellectual bandwidth. You sense whether depth is welcome or punished. If punished, you compress yourself, not consciously, strategically. That compression is subtle. You soften your vocabulary, you reduce complexity, you pretend not to notice contradictions. And each time you do that, a small fracture forms between who you are and how you present yourself. That is identity fragmentation. The gap widens slowly, outwardly functional, internally divided. There is also emotional fatigue. High intelligence often pairs with high pattern recognition. You do not just see what is happening, you see where it is heading. You anticipate incompetence before it unfolds. You predict social dynamics before they become visible, and prediction without influence creates frustration. You watch preventable mistakes happen. You observe avoidable chaos repeat itself. Eventually, you stop trying to correct it, not because you cannot, because you are tired of paying the social cost of being right. This is where irrelevance begins to creep in. Not external irrelevance, internal. You start asking yourself whether your standards even matter in an environment that does not reward them. When intelligence is not valued, it becomes heavy, and heavy things are set down. Quietly, you tell yourself you are choosing peace. Sometimes you are. Other times, you are surrendering influence without admitting it. There is another layer most men refuse to confront. Superiority can become a hiding place. If you convince yourself that no one understands you, you no longer have to risk being misunderstood. If you believe the environment is beneath you, you no longer have to compete inside it. That is strategic withdrawal disguised as intellectual pride. It feels dignified, it feels controlled, but it slowly erodes visibility. And visibility, whether you like it or not, is tied to power. Schopenhauer described the unsocial tendency of the highly intelligent man as natural, and in many ways it is. The inner world can be richer than external chatter. But modern reality adds a complication. Withdrawal today does not just protect depth, it reduces leverage. If you remove yourself entirely, less capable individuals fill the space. Standards decline, decisions worsen, noise multiplies, and you watch it happen from a distance, telling yourself you are above it. That distance can feel like strength, until you realize you have no impact. This is the silent decay, not intellectual decay, strategic decay. Potential unused becomes potential lost. And the mind that once saw 10 moves ahead begins using that foresight only to avoid engagement. If you recognize this pattern in yourself, understand something clearly. Awareness without action hardens into stagnation. If this level of analysis is rare in your environment, subscribe. Not because you need inspiration, because you need friction sharp enough to keep you honest. We are not finished, because withdrawal is only phase one. The more dangerous phase is what happens when the old version of you no longer fits the world you inhabit. And that is where this becomes serious. There comes a point when the version of you that once functioned efficiently no longer works. The ambitious one, the outspoken one, the man who believed competence would automatically translate into influence. He starts to feel outdated, not because he lost ability, because the environment shifted, and instead of adapting outwardly, you adapted inwardly. You reduced exposure, you minimized risk, you convinced yourself that silence was maturity. But something else is happening underneath that silence. The old identity is collapsing, and collapse, if misunderstood, feels like failure. You notice it in subtle ways. Less desire to argue, less interest in proving yourself, less emotional reaction to praise or criticism. At first, it feels like growth, detachment, control. But if you look closer, you may see something more complex. You are no longer driven by the same external incentives. Status games feel transparent. Social hierarchies feel predictable. Recognition feels temporary. The old fuel does not ignite you anymore. When external rewards lose their grip, a vacuum forms. And vacuums are dangerous, because if you do not consciously rebuild around internal standards, you drift. You mistake numbness for stability. You label disengagement as peace. But peace without direction turns into stagnation. The mind needs structure the same way the body needs resistance. Without it, strength fades. Solitude during this phase is not accidental, it is restructuring. When a man begins to question the value system around him, he often retreats to recalibrate. He stops identifying with the collective we. He begins observing from a psychological distance, not hostile, just separate. This separation can be powerful. It allows independent thinking. It protects against herd behavior, but it also carries risk. If separation turns into permanent disconnection, you lose feedback. And without feedback, calibration becomes distorted. There is a quiet fear here that most intelligent men will not articulate. What if I rebuild incorrectly? What if I detach so deeply that re-entry becomes impossible? What if independence slowly mutates into isolation? These are not dramatic fears. They are structural ones, because identity is architecture. If you demolish without a blueprint, you do not create freedom. You create instability. Many men misinterpret this phase. They assume something is wrong because they feel less socially aligned. In reality, the mind may be rejecting outdated motivations. The collapse of the old self is not tragedy, it is filtration. The shallow layers burn off. The external validation dependency weakens. But what replaces it determines everything. If you are in this stage, observe carefully, not emotionally, strategically. Comment the city you are watching from. I want to see where men are going through this quietly, not for numbers, for pattern recognition. Because this restructuring is happening everywhere, but few speak about it directly. Here is the pressure point. When the old identity dies, the space it leaves must be filled intentionally. If you do not design the next version of yourself, the environment will design it for you. And the environment does not prioritize depth, it prioritizes utility. The question now is not whether intelligent men are disappearing, it is whether they are rebuilding with precision or dissolving without realizing it. And that distinction will define the next phase. Now we remove the most comfortable lie. The environment is not the primary problem. The noise is not the primary problem. The decline in standards is not the primary problem. Those are variables. The real variable is your response. At some point, withdrawal stopped being reflection and started being avoidance. And avoidance, when intellectualized, feels justified. You tell yourself, You are protecting your energy. You tell yourself you are waiting for better conditions. You tell yourself the arena is beneath you, but the truth is more uncomfortable. You lost the appetite for friction. Friction exposes weaknesses. It reveals emotional volatility. It tests discipline. It forces you to convert thought into action. Thinking is safe. Analysis is controlled. Engagement is unpredictable. And unpredictability threatens the intelligent ego because it risks visible failure. It is easier to critique the system than to compete inside it. Easier to observe incompetence than to risk being measured publicly. This is where victimhood becomes sophisticated. Not loud, not dramatic, quiet, rational. You begin to see yourself as the misunderstood exception in a flawed world. That narrative protects pride. It also paralyzes growth. Responsibility is not emotional, it is structural. If you are invisible, it is because you chose not to position yourself. If your ideas have no influence, it is because you withheld them or failed to refine their delivery. If less capable men are advancing, it is because they accepted exposure while you prioritize safety. This is not condemnation, it is calibration. The moment you reclaim authorship over your positioning, the dynamic shifts. Discipline now becomes non-negotiable. Not physical discipline alone. Cognitive discipline. The ability to interrupt cynical thoughts before they solidify. Behavioral consistency. Showing up even when the environment feels beneath your standards. Emotional containment. Feeling frustration without broadcasting it. Observing incompetence without allowing it to define your engagement level. Without structure, your collapse phase turns into decay. With structure, it becomes consolidation. You must separate solitude from avoidance. Solitude is chosen and scheduled. Avoidance is reactive and indefinite. Solitude strengthens identity. Avoidance weakens it. The difference is measurable in output. Are you producing, building, refining, or are you merely consuming and critiquing? Intelligence without disciplined execution becomes decorative. It looks impressive internally. It produces little externally. This is the turning point. Either you accept that invisibility is self-authored, or you continue blaming the landscape. One path restores leverage. The other guarantees stagnation. If you are still here, you already sense which one applies to you. Subscribe if you are serious about rebuilding with structure, not excuses. Because the final step is not about returning to who you were. It is about constructing a version of yourself that can operate inside noise without being shaped by it. And that requires precision. Return to the question from the beginning. Are intelligent men disappearing? No. They are shedding versions of themselves that no longer function. The problem was never intelligence. The problem was misalignment between depth and structure. When depth exists without disciplined direction, it turns inward and begins to consume itself. When structure is added, depth becomes leverage. Reconstruction is not dramatic, it is surgical. First, eliminate passive superiority, the belief that seeing flaws is equivalent to being above them. Observation is not elevation, execution is. Remove the habit of silent contempt. It wastes energy and produces nothing. Replace it with strategic participation. Enter spaces selectively, but when you enter, engage fully. Speak with precision. Contribute deliberately. Withdraw only after impact, not before. Second, build visible competence, not theoretical intelligence, demonstrable value. Refine communication until complex ideas become sharp and transferable. Intelligence that cannot be translated becomes isolation. Intelligence that can be communicated becomes authority. This requires practice, exposure, iteration. It will feel inefficient at first. Good. Efficiency is not the goal. Expansion is. Third, endure misunderstanding without retreat. Not everyone will track your reasoning speed. Not everyone will appreciate nuance. That is expected. The mistake was assuming the rare understanding meant you should disengage. Instead, you learn to operate without constant validation. You measure yourself against your own execution standards, not applause. Emotional containment becomes power here. You do not need agreement to continue. Fourth, design your solitude. Do not fall into it. Allocate time for thinking, reading, building. Protect it intentionally, but re-enter the arena with equal intention. The alternation between depth and engagement creates balance. Too much isolation weakens influence. Too much exposure weakens clarity. Controlled oscillation builds strength. What must be eliminated is passive withdrawal. What must be built is structured presence. What must be endured is friction. The friction you once avoided becomes the resistance that sharpens you. And something shifts when you accept this. You stop viewing the world as hostile to intelligence. You start viewing it as raw material. Noise becomes contrast. Mediocrity becomes opportunity. Confusion becomes space for clarity. This is how the intelligent man stops disappearing, not by becoming louder, by becoming deliberate, not by demanding recognition, by making himself undeniable through consistent output, not by isolating permanently, by choosing when and how to engage. You do not need to be understood by everyone. You need to be effective where it matters. That is control. That is autonomy. That is strength without theatrics. If this restructuring resonates, watch the next video. We are going deeper into how to operate strategically in environments that do not reward depth at first glance. Subscribe if you are building this version of yourself deliberately, quietly, precisely, and without asking permission.